Here you go. Thank you.
Subtitles by Dima Torzak are out of control.
The United States is pounding Iran, prompting Iran to attack 5 countries at once, including Oman. And against this backdrop, Saudi Arabia has resumed direct strikes, yes, on neighboring Yemen, where one of Iran's proxy groups, the Yemeni Houthis, is based. Today, July 13, Saudi planes bombed the international airport in Sana'a. The official reason is as follows. They needed to prevent a civilian Iranian plane from landing. The plane landed anyway, just in another city. Well, yes. The official reason is as follows. They needed to prevent a civilian Iranian plane from landing. The plane landed anyway, just in another city. They immediately responded that, quote, Saudi Arabia has declared war and bears full responsibility for it. But here's what's important to understand right away. This is not a new war. No. This is a war that has been going on since 2014, but was put on pause in 2022. In this episode, we'll break everything down and explain exactly what happened and why this is an old war, not a new one. And most importantly, why now? Why did the Saudis start attacking Yemen at this particular moment? Because behind the strike on the airport in Sana'a is the oil trap that Riyadh has been driven into by this US-Iran war. And we'll also talk about how this is crushing Tehran's axis of resistance, and which is very important, why Israel suddenly seems to be on the sidelines while the whole region, is fighting. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss all these topics together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like this episode, and leave any comment you want. So, let's start with the facts. On the morning of July 13th, several Saudi airstrikes hit Sana'a International Airport. This is the capital of Yemen, which the Houthis have controlled since 2014. According to the internationally recognized Yemeni government, the goal was to prevent an Iranian plane from landing there. A statement from Yemen's official Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Houthi terrorist militias, with the support of the Iranian regime, did not allow Yemeni national planes to land at the capital's airport and insisted that an Iranian plane violate Yemeni airspace. Therefore, the runway was attacked. By the way, Riyadh has not officially commented on these strikes, so if you didn't get it, the idea was this. The Yemeni government forces were supposed to land their plane. The Houthis prevented this but wanted to land an Iranian plane there. And so the official authorities of Yemen decided to prevent this, but the strike was carried out by Saudi Arabia. They destroyed the runway, and as a result, the Iranian plane couldn't land. Let me explain which planes we're discussing. You need to understand this too. First of all, it was a plane belonging to the Iranian airline Mahan Air, carrying the returning Houthi delegation. They were returning from the funeral of the slain supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei. In the video now being circulated by Houthi media, Nasser ad-Din al-Ammer, who is the deputy head of the media department of Ansar Allah, that's what the Yemeni Houthis are called, he was unable to land in Sana'a. The plane was not damaged. It was simply redirected to Hodeidah, which is a port city on the Red Sea. Iran and its allies immediately declared the landing a symbolic victory over the Saudi blockade. They said that no matter how hard the Saudis tried to close the skies over Yemen, the plane still managed to break through and land, maybe not in Sana'a, but at least in Hodeidah. The Houthis' response to this is very tough. The military spokesperson of the movement, Yahya Saria, stated, and I quote, "The Saudi aggression against Sana'a airport has ended the de-escalation phase, and they must bear the consequences of their aggression." A high-ranking official, Hazem al-Assad from the same movement, added, "The Saudi regime will find that it has dug its own grave." And now, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, already controlled by the Houthis, has noted the main point. They say that this is a violation of the truce established in 2022, and according to their wording, the Saudi strike is the beginning of a war.
Subscribe to هذه اللحظات مشاهدينا الكرام كما تشاهدون غارات جوية عدوانية على مطار صنعاء الدولي إلى حد الآن بغارتين استهدفت مدرج الهبوط والإقلاع هنا كما تشاهدون. Concord translation. Nancy Spider. Subtitles by Dima Torzak. Subtitles by Dima Torzak. Subtitles made by Dima Torzak.
But in fact, it was only a matter of time before this war flared up again. Let's follow the chronology to understand that this isn't some new war. 2014 Yemeni Houthis, that is the Shiite movement Ansar Allah, seized the city of Sana'a. They are actively supported by Iran. The president of Yemen flees from Sana'a to the south to the city of Aden, where he remains to this day. A civil war begins in Yemen, this 2015. Saudi Arabia forms a coalition consisting of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates with the support of the United States of America, and begins an air war against the Houthis. At the same time, it imposes a blockade on Yemen by land, sea, and air. As a result of this blockade, the United Nations calls it one of the worst humanitarian disasters on the planet because millions of people are on the brink of starvation, with destroyed healthcare and water supply systems. The result of this campaign was disastrous because after more than 5 years of bombings, it ended in failure. Then it got to the point where the Emirates and Saudi Arabia, who were supposedly in the same coalition, fell out with each other and even started fighting each other on Yemeni territory, and in general, the whole thing failed. The coalition was never able to drive the Houthis out of Sana'a. In fact, the Houthis only grew stronger thanks to Iran, which had been supplying them with weapons and money all this time. In 2022, the parties finally signed a truce under the auspices of the UN. Suddenly, large-scale fighting sharply subsided, opening the door for negotiations. But here's an important nuance. Sporadic clashes never actually stopped, and the war, accordingly, never fully ended. That's why it's more accurate to say that a new war didn't start, but rather the old war was simply resumed after a pause. And it was resumed because the circumstances changed. So what circumstances do we see now? Let's figure it out together. And here's the key to the whole episode. Why did the Saudis take the risk right now? Well, it would seem they already have experience with the war in Yemen, and it wasn't the most positive one. And you might wonder, why get involved in this war again? Let's take another look at the chain of events. The Strait of Hormuz has been closed since late February due to the US-Iran war. For Saudi Arabia, this is a disaster because its main export terminal, Ras Tanura, which is, by the way, the largest in the world, has been paralyzed. And accordingly, there's nowhere to send the oil. Previously, they used to send all their tankers from the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz. And then these tankers would go out into the open ocean and trade would take place, and suddenly the Strait of Hormuz is closed. What does Riyadh do in this situation? Riyadh was partially prepared for this scenario, so it reroutes its oil westward. The East-West Pipeline, 1,200 kilometers from the eastern oil fields to the port of Yanbu on the Red Sea, has been restored to its full capacity of 7 million barrels per day. Moreover, they are ramping up this pipeline quite quickly. Exports through Yanbu are increasing fourfold to a record of almost 4.5 million barrels per day. And so the kingdom was literally saved by this route. And it was precisely thanks to exports through the Red Sea that it didn't really feel the consequences of the closure of the Hormuz Strait. But there's a big problem. In order to get from the Red Sea to buyers in Asia and Europe, tankers carrying Saudi oil have to pass through the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait. This is a narrow bottleneck, only 26 kilometers wide between Arabia and Africa. And who controls the southern shore of this strait? That's right, the Yemeni Houthis. And the Houthis, allies of Iran, could theoretically block the Bab-el-Mandeb and basically leave Saudi Arabia with no way to export its oil at all. And now the US and Iran have entered a new phase of war again, and there's a risk that Iran will involve its proxy forces in this conflict, so Riyadh is acting preemptively. In other words, Saudi Arabia is trying to weaken the Houthis before they cut off its lifeline in the Red Sea. Now let's put all these pieces together. While Washington and Tehran are hitting each other in the Strait of Hormuz and Iran is launching missiles at American bases in Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Jordan and Oman, Yemen is becoming the second front of the same war. The Houthis are a direct proxy of Iran and part of the axis of resistance. Back on the first day of the US war against Iran, the Houthis threatened to resume attacks in the Red Sea and close the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait, but they held back. Already in mid-March, the Houthis stated that they were simply waiting for an Iranian signal. At the end of March, the Houthis finally launched a ballistic missile at Israel, formally entering the war. And on June 8th, they announced a complete ban on Israeli shipping in the Red Sea, declaring such vessels legitimate military targets. But the main event happened last week. The Yemeni government forces, supported by Saudi Arabia, repelled a Houthi assault south of Al-Hudaydah. That is, the Houthis began escalating the war in the country as early as last week. And now, take a look at what is left of the Iranian proxy network, that very axis of resistance with which Tehran has kept the region on edge for decades. Hezbollah in Lebanon has been defeated. Israel controls southern Lebanon. Israeli Defense Minister Katz publicly stated that 100 villages along the western part of the border have been destroyed and refuses to withdraw troops until Hezbollah is completely disarmed. Hamas in Gaza has been neutralized, and a ceasefire has held there since late 2025. Iraqi groups are under enormous pressure and are keeping a low profile for now. The Houthis in Yemen have remained the last relatively intact link. That's exactly why Iran holds on to them so tightly. And that's exactly why the Saudi strike on Sana'a is a blow to the last pillar of Iran's regional architecture. But here's the paradox, which is also important to understand. A strike against the Houthis might not break them, but on the contrary, awaken them. The Houthis stayed on the sidelines, not out of weakness. Tehran most likely decided that it was better to keep the Houthi card in reserve and play it a little later. And now this card might just be put on the table, blocking two straits at once. Just think about it. The Strait of Hormuz is blocked, through which 20% of the world's oil flows. And the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait, through which 12% of all global oil flows, 32% that is, a third of all flows will be blocked. Imagine what will happen to the prices. If the Houthis decide to take revenge, they have only one but deadly move: to close the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait. And now the deputy head of the Houthis foreign ministry, Hussein al-Azi, spoke in his own manner. Quote, "If Sana'a decides to close the Bab-el-Mandeb, then neither people nor jinn will be able to stop it." What will happen in such a scenario? In fact, the Houthis don't need to sink every tanker there. Just a few attacks are enough for insurers and ship owners to flee on their own. There is experience with this. Between 2023 and 2025, attacks by Yemeni Houthis reduced the flow of oil through this strait by more than half. And the ship started going around Africa, losing 14 days of travel time. But now the stakes are much higher. About 20% passes through Bab-el-Mandeb, that's 12% of global maritime trade. And for Riyadh, it's a matter of survival. If the strait is closed, then 4 to 4.5 million barrels of Saudi oil per day will simply be left in limbo, with the Hormuz Strait already closed. And now the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran, by the way, has already threatened to close the Bab-el-Mandeb if Israel does not stop its strikes in Lebanon, and Israel is not stopping them. In other words, Saudi Arabia struck at those who have Saudi Arabia by the throat. And here I want to draw your attention to a separate but very important point. Notice, the Middle East region is on fire. The US is bombing Iran. Iran is bombing Kuwait, Bahrain, Jordan, Qatar, and Oman. Saudi Arabia is striking the Yemeni Houthis. And Israel at this time seems to be on the sidelines. How did this happen? There are several reasons, and they all point to one thing. At this stage, Israel has already fought for what it wanted. And now it is watching to its advantage, putting into practice that very factor of deterrence. First of all, it has accomplished its objectives. It has crushed Hezbollah to the point where it is no longer that dangerous. And the Israeli army is sitting in southern Lebanon and has no intention of leaving. Secondly, Trump has effectively pushed Netanyahu out of the negotiations with Iran. Israel has simply dropped out of the process. And thirdly, of course, there's domestic politics. Netanyahu has elections coming up. Trump's deal with Iran is a political disaster for him, and he doesn't need another war right now. But the main thing is the strategic logic. Right now, what's happening is something that people in Israel could only dream about. Arabs are fighting Persians. Sunni Saudi Arabia is bombing the Shiite Houthis. America is taking out the Iranian fleet. Israel's enemies are methodically, wearing each other down, without a single Israeli soldier. But there's a very subtle detail here that gives everything away. According to sources, Israel is currently building a military base in Somaliland, on the other side of the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait, for strikes against whom? The Houthis, of course. So Israel is not standing aside. Israel is simply preparing. In summary, formally today Saudi Arabia has started a new war. In fact, it has resumed an old war that it already lost once after spending years bombing it and sacrificing its reputation. Why did it take the risk? Well, because the US war with Iran has closed the Hormuz Strait and trapped Riyadh in a situation where its only oil route depends on the mercy of Iranian proxy forces. What's next? As I see it, there are two scenarios. Either the Saudis manage to weaken the Houthis and then Iran loses its last foothold in the axis of resistance, or the Houthis close the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait. And then the world gets two blocked straits at the same time, and Saudi Arabia is left without any oil exports at all. The second scenario is no longer a regional conflict, as you understand, it's a global energy shock, and then many will have to get involved. Well, what about Israel? At this time, Israel is finishing building its base in Somalil and watching its enemies strike each other. Perhaps the most advantageous position in this war is the one where you don't participate in it. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.